Welcome to the Unapologetic with Janine McKinnon podcast, your go-to place for approachable conversations around sacred sexuality and conscious relationships. I'm your host, Janine McKinnon, certified trauma-informed sex, love, and relationship coach who's on a mission to support 1 million women and couples to experience deeper connection and more expansive pleasure inside and outside the bedroom. This is the space to go deep, to dive below surface level relationships and mess sex and explore the sacredness that sexuality and conscious relationships have to offer. Because deep connection, spiritual sexuality, full body orgasms, and transmuted sexual energy are available to everyone. And I'm here to serve the collective, to provide the knowledge, wisdom, and tools to access them. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful we're able to connect in this way, and I can't wait to dig into the contents of this episode with you. Without further ado, let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to another episode inside the Unapologetic with Janine McKinnon podcast. And today I am looking forward to a conversation with Dr. Diane Mueller, my libido doc, and we will be getting into long-term relationships and how sometimes the passion, the libido can begin to fade. So how can we bring that passion back? How can we bring novelty into things? What might it look like if we open up the relationship or keep it closed? So these are all things that we will be talking about today. So welcome, Dr. Diane.
Thank you, Janine. Thanks for that amazing intro. I'm really excited to talk about all this stuff. It's so needed. Passion is lost so often in longevity and long-term relationships, and it just doesn't have to be.
Yes, I completely agree. Like, it is the norm for passion to lose, but it doesn't necessarily need to be our norm. There's so much we can do about and keeping that passion alive for decades. So before we get into the nitty gritty, I would just love it if you could just share a little bit about who you are, what you do, why you're so passionate about sharing about all of this.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I'm Dr. Diane. I'm a board certified sexologist, and the story I tell, when people ask me like the why, right? Why am I doing this? Why am I online talking about sex in my personal life and all these things? The story I like to tell is also personal because when I was in my early 20s, late teens, early 20s, I started having this very unique type of vulvar pain. And I went to, doctors and ruled out all the common things. And luckily all the tests were normal, but it was still like, what the heck is causing this pain? It was keeping me up at night. It was, really causing some distress. And up until this point, my relationship with sex was very limited. I was raised in a super Catholic household, and, and my genitals referred to largely as down there, and you don't touch them, and you don't talk about them, and all those kind of things. And so I had a roommate at the time when I was experiencing this vulvar pain who was really open about talking about her masturbation practice. And she was a good friend of mine as well. We became good friends. And she one day hands me a book after hearing me go on and on and on about not sleeping very well again. And the book was Sex for One by Betty Dodson. And this just even being, handed this book with my background was already very risque around just holding, holding something that was so anti the way I was raised. But I was kind of just desperate and didn't know what to do. And so I started reading this book out of curiosity. And in this book, it was talking about self-pleasure, but self-pleasure, not just for pleasure, but for healing. And Betty was giving examples of when people were having their self-pleasure practice, what was actually happening as far as things like eliminating pain. I was like, well, this is interesting. This fits my situation really well. So one brave night, I decided to masturbate for the first time, and lo and behold, my pain went away. I was like, well, that's interesting. So next night, pain's back. I'm back at it again. Pain goes away. And after several nights of repeating this, I don't know, it's probably about a week or so, I don't remember how many nights it was, all of a sudden the pain was just gone for good. So that was my first intro to now the phrase I use a lot in my work is pleasure is not just about desire, but it's something we require. because that was like the first intro in my mind to what the heck is this thing? Like, what the heck is happening in our body? I'm a scientist, like at heart. And it really made me curious, like, what the heck is happening in the body where something that is pleasurable like this could actually be so deeply healing? Which really also started to unwind my programming and started my process of reading and studying, because then it started making me like wonder other things like, well, if God, and that's the term I was using then and still the term I use for that energy, divine force, whatever anybody wants to call it, but whatever you want to call it, my question was, well, how could this energy, how could this force, how could God make something in me that were on me or part of me that is bad if it is like all of this ability to heal me? So that was kind of the fundamental like question and process that like springboarded 2.5 decades later, where I am now.
Oh, I love that. I love hearing people's turning points and what really created that shift. And I found myself with similar questions. Like, I think about our clitoris with over 10,000 nerve endings, the only body organ which sole purpose is pleasure. So why would we have this if pleasure is bad and wrong and sinful and all of these things? It really is, as you said, it's so, so healing.
Yes, that was actually another thing that I came up with on my own as well, around like, this doesn't make sense. Like, we can't have this body part that it has this purpose, like you said, of solely pleasure, and it's bad. Like, that doesn't make any logical sense. It just, why would we have that? So I think it's a really important thing, right? To like question these beliefs and what we've been told in society and our program and our culture and all the places, school, education, medical school, even like what we're really taught about sex and arousal and passion and all of it.
Absolutely. And I feel like that plays right into the losing of our libido, the losing of our passion, because often we get to a point in our adulthood, in these long-term relationships, we've had this societal conditioning layering and layering and layering on top of us all of our lives. And for many women getting into these relationships, perhaps the passion's love, we tend to have our honeymoon phase. And then it dwindles down and sex changes, and perhaps it's not as pleasurable. It becomes more of that chore. The clock starts ticking of like, okay, it's been a while. I guess I need to do this. And that layers that conditioning, that layers on our nervous system of associating sex with these things instead of being pleasurable, instead of being healing.
Yeah, it's amazing what we're just programmed in society, like one of the stories I love to tell is when I listened to this lecture by one of the co-founders of NLP, neuro linguistic programming. And for any audience members that's never heard of that, it's a kind of like this brain nervous system retraining methodology. So the co-founder, Richard Bandler, I was listening to a lecture of his, and he was talking about when he was getting ready to get married. And it was something like he was being told by so many people around him, like, well, you better enjoy the sex now because you get married and it's going to go downhill, right? That's the program. Mm-hmm. But what his response was to this, I think, is like the most important thing. And his response was, wait, I'm going to practice something over and over and over again and get worse at it. And that was like another light bulb moment for me. I was like, wait, what is happening here, right? Because anything else, like I'm taking Spanish lessons right now. I'm learning Spanish, and like every week, I meet with my instructor, my teacher, and every week I can tell, like, oh yeah, I have my vocab better. I'm better in conversation. It's like these small incremental changes, right? So anything we learn, we practice over and over again, we tend to improve. And so logically, right, like then sex with the same person over and over, like we practice that over and over, sex should be getting better, not worse, right?
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. And I feel like it's kind of the difference between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. When we are continuing to have sex with each other and it feels good, it feels pleasurable, we're learning each other's bodies and what we like and begin to explore with each other, of course we're going to keep getting better at it. Of course we're going to want more of it. Like the more orgasms we have, the more we're going to want. And then on the flip side, when sex isn't pleasurable, when it does, going back to that, feel like more of a chore and it's not something we associate with all of these positive things, then it's reinforcing that negativity over and over and over again. So it's cementing in our nervous systems whenever, say, our partner goes to make those advances. It's like, oh, this isn't good. I don't want to do this.
I agree with all of that. I think to add another layer to that, I think another component of this is like, as we think about, okay, well, learning anything, right? So we're learning how to play a musical instrument, or we're learning a new sport or language or whatever it is. Anytime we show up to learn something new, to improve our skills, to get better at it, what tends to be is like we show up curious and ready to learn like another layer, right? So it's like, oh, we're going to learn another chord on the guitar, or oh, we're going to learn how to hold our body a little bit differently so we improve our basketball shot, or whatever, we're doing there. But with sex, I think like so many times, so much of the time, like the opposite happens, where we show up and yes, we have all those positive and negative things, like, like you're saying, that can influence things as well. But another avenue is we show up, and oftentimes we just then are in that like sexual script of A plus B plus C plus D equals orgasm or not. And we just, largely do, the same things, I think, over and over and over. So one of the things that happens, I think, is like we start to lose in our relationships that curiosity for like, oh, what can we learn? Like, what can we learn about each other's bodies? How are our bodies changing? What can we do to like bring something new and interesting into this? How can we actually shift our bodies or bring in a toy or do something to actually bring a level of that curiosity back? And I think that's another layer of like, it's so easy with that stuff to just get into the habit of, this is how I cook my dinner. This is how I brush my teeth. This is how I have sex with my lover.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm so glad you highlighted that, because it really is such an important piece, is being able to have that curiosity. And also, I think another part of it is letting go of expectation too. And so really being able to be curious, to play, to explore with each other, to bring in these different things, or to touch in a different way, and bring in some of that novelty without necessarily that expectation tied. Because when we bring in the expectation, we can get caught up in our heads too, which really does us a disservice, especially when it comes to orgasming. And I find the more we put pressure on orgasm, pressure does not equal pleasure. It's pulling us right out of our body and into our heads. And that's not how we can surrender into that orgasmic bliss. So when we can match that curiosity with that expectation and really explore together, like that's where that magic gets to happen.
Yeah, it really does. And a really great intro point that I've found for people is doing things with their partners like yes, no, maybe checklists. So
Mm-hmm.
I have one. If people want one of these, it's at mysexdoc.com. And what I love about the yes, no, maybe checklist is so amazing is you can print these out and you go through them. I think there's maybe like 100 and 150, something like that, different things on this checklist. And you go through them, your partner goes through them, and you say, okay, well, now let's come together and talk about these things and see what we're both in alignment for yes, see what we're both in alignment for no. And for anything in the maybes, then the conversation comes around like, okay, well, what would make a maybe into a yes? And what would make a maybe turn a maybe into a no? And I think one of the most important things about like this kind of thing that can bring so much novelty and so much newness in is then how we talk about it. Because another area what I really find just like shuts down sex, as I imagine, a lot of listeners do as well, is the way that we communicate about it is essential. Like, for example, what I've seen in research on conflict is anytime there's conflict in a partnership. there's three different areas that can be affected: the one partner, the other partner, and then kind of that shared in between space. And in normal conflict, all three of those areas tend to be at like equal threats, right? They all like kind of equal, like taking care of all of these three spaces. What's really interesting in the research on the same model on sex conversations, there is one of these three areas that is the biggest threat, and that's the threat to the self. So like if my partner and I say do a yes no maybe checklist, and we're like, oh, we have to talk about this thing, and am I going to be judged, or am I going to be shamed, or how is this going to happen? I'm going to have the biggest desire, just like in like innately, right? According to research, I will have the biggest desire to protect myself. He will have the biggest desire to protect himself. And so then everybody is like going at this from not from like that curiosity in the conversation and how we're learning it. Everybody is coming to the conversation with, how can I protect myself?
Yes, that's such a big piece as well. And I think that's why doing this exploration work together around sexuality is such a big portal for us as couples to be able to go through and really build that strong connection. And yes, we get that connection through the actual sexual act, but there's also a really big part of that connection that goes through having these vulnerable conversations where it is really vulnerable. We are really scared about what shame or judgment may come up, and having so much of that fear and needing to protect ourselves. And when we're able to move through that together, have the conversations, and be loved through it, to feel safe within that, and to even be celebrated in it, like, ooh, you want that too? I had no idea. I'm totally in that too. Then it helps reinforce, like, yes, we're doing good things, and it helps build that momentum for us to continue to explore together and feel a lot safer through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I find one of the things, like one of the things I talk a lot about is like the how, the when, the where of these kind of conversations. And all of those components I think are important, but the biggest important component of talking about any of this, I think, is the how. And it is because of this, this conflict thing that I bring up around the protection. So one of the things I talk about is like, if we're going to do something like a yes, no, maybe checklist, or we're going to talk about anything with, sex in general, as far as, oh, I like that thing you did, or I didn't like that thing you did, or I want to try this, or whatever it is, that having a conversation, like a pre-conversation on, this is how I want you to respond if, is really important. So for example, in going into a conversation, like, okay, I want to have a conversation around, bringing a sex toy in. Like if somebody's never brought a sex toy into their lovemaking session, like, and that's the conversation. And innately, humans, oftentimes when this comes up, it's like so easy to be worried about the other person shaming us or judging us. So a pre-conversation would look something like, hey, I want to share about, something I'm interested in exploring. And if you are, if you don't really like this, or you don't like the idea of it, here's how I would like you to respond so that I feel taken care of during this and I don't feel shame. So then when we preset that up, now we've given our partner the way that they can still express what they need to express, but in a way that we've asked them to, so that we're not then creating, or we're not then almost receiving or self-creating, either way we want to look at it, this shame or this negative impact that then will impact us even further in the bedroom.
Yes, I love that you highlighted that. And I think it really speaks to, again, that open communication and that self-responsibility piece in this too, and really setting each other up for success. And when you can really bring in that intentionality of, okay, we're going into vulnerable territory here. How can we get through this in the best way possible, where we are supporting each other and where we're not breaking each other down? Because ultimately, if we're going through a big checklist of over 100 yes, no, maybes, chances are there's going to be some things that don't align. And so even bringing that intention in is like, okay, we're not going to match up on everything, and that's totally okay. It would be great if you could just meet me in this way. And if maybe we could start out focusing on where those yeses match up, and that's like that great safe way we can start. And then, okay, let's take this a bit deeper and go through those maybes and explore through that together. And just having that responsibility of like, this is what I need. This is how I would love for you to meet me. How can I help meet you in a way that's supportive for you? And how can I hold myself in that vulnerability as well without shutting down or wanting to walk away or to be more triggered?
Yeah, absolutely. I think another component I think is the way we frame things, right? So I think it's so easy in these conversations too, if we don't like something our lover is doing, it's so easy, and I think it's a human tendency to just be like, I want to just say this thing because I want to fix it, right? And it's not that I recommend that people don't say those things. Like, I think we do need to talk about, hey, this is working for me, this is not. But I do find that oftentimes in the beginning, when people are building this, this conversational muscle, that one of the best ways to start is actually by starting and saying, like, as specific as possible, like, hey, you know that thing that you did? Like, maybe they did this, maybe they touched your thigh in a certain way, maybe it was like the way the clitoris was rubbed on a woman, or maybe the way the testicles were rubbed on a man, like whatever it is, right? But being like as specific as possible and just being like, you know that thing? Like, I would like you to do more of that. Like, that is amazing. And so we can start by like talking about, hey, what we want more of and what we love. And sometimes I find even early in the conversations, unless something is like needs to be said, right, where it's like, okay, this is important, this is like causing harm. It's one of these things like, well, I've been sort of, dealing with this thing for years or months, and I don't really like it that much, but I've been dealing with it. Yes, we definitely want to bring that up, but sometimes I find that the first conversation to bring up before we even go there is to bring up more the positive and have a few conversations around the positive, so that there's that building up almost of our partner's like sex ego in many ways. And the other thing that I find is that when we do that, oftentimes when we focus on the positive, some of those things that maybe we are not liking as much, or maybe we used to like and we don't anymore, sometimes just when we add more of the good, those things just fall away naturally. And sometimes it is important to go in and say like, hey, that thing that you're doing, like, hey, I used to like that. That's not really working for me anymore, whatever it is. But oftentimes if we start around more like that positive, I love this thing, it's super specific, build them up, I want more of it, then later on or another conversation, it's a lot easier to be like, yeah, actually that thing, like, I don't really, it's not really working for me right now. And the way that we frame that too is more around like, it's not working for me, like not like you're doing that wrong or that bad, or I don't, it's like, hey, like my body, I'm just noticing like I'm just really not feeling my body respond to that thing right now. And I'm wondering if we could just shift it this way and explore, and like, I don't know what's happening. It's just my body is just like not responding. It's making it about us and not about them doing something wrong.
Yes, that's such an important distinction.
Yeah.
Is like, it's me not feeling so great about it. It's not you doing it wrong. Why do you do this?
Yeah.
And it really helps to just anchor us, and like, we are that team. We want to explore this and have fun together. And so how do we get to do more of that? And it goes into that positive reinforcement of, okay, this is the positive stuff. Let's do more of this. Okay, this is working for us. It helps create that setting of safety within ourselves. So as you said, we're a little bit more primed for slightly down the road when it's like, okay, like this just isn't really feeling so great. I love when you do this. Let's do more of this, and maybe we can just like pause or not do this right now. And one thing that came to mind when you were speaking to that too is that it's okay for us to change and to acknowledge that. I think that's a big piece of this as well, because often we will like things at one point in our life, or even one point in our cycles as women. And then there's another point where it's like we are so not into that anymore. And it can be confusing for our partners as well. And so just acknowledging that, and even acknowledging it for them, is like, I know I used to like that, but just now it's not really my thing.
Yeah, I talk about that all the time too. I think it's such a good point. It's like we don't want to do things like bring any um assumptions from a previous relationship and sexual assumptions around like, oh, this is how I please my partner. We don't want to bring that into our current relationship. We can take some of the like skills we've learned and try them, but we don't want to make any assumptions around like, hey, just because his last partner was pleased in this way, that's going to have any information on our current partner. And the same thing within the context of, our, I think our acute relationships, like what we're in the present, is that we want to be very careful and be like, well, just because somebody like that, a partner like that a year ago, like you said, does not mean they like it now. The cycles change and all that. And that's why I think conversation, I think so many people are having really mediocre sex because they're not talking about it. And we're not taught that talking about it is part of it. And I think we're just taught that, like, well, everybody should just get off like we see in the media. It's like 2 minutes and everybody's having the time of their life and they're seeing stars. And it's like, it's just so not real, but it leaves this impression around like, well, that's what it looks like. So I think it's so easy for people to, I mean, I was this way for a long time around like, well, that's what it's supposed to be like. So if I'm not having, this rock star orgasm from like, penetration in 2 minutes, then there's got to be clearly something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously not the story at all, but the more that we, I think, resist making it normal to talk to our partner about, I think that it's a huge reason why people get so stuck.
Yes, it really is. And it's a huge reason where we doubt ourselves and think something's wrong with us because we generally aren't taught these things. Like for me, sex education was based around don't get pregnant, don't get STDs.
Yeah.
There's nothing around how to enjoy yourself, how to connect with someone, how to feel good in your body. And so I find we come into these things just expecting it, as you said, to work as we've seen it work in the media, and that really isn't the case. And so conversations is a huge piece, and circling back to that curiosity, it's learning those new skills. Like there's tons of resources available if it's like, okay, I don't know how I want to be touched. I don't know what other things we could do outside of what we have regularly gone to. And so we can explore and tone up those skills and learn to do things in a different way, because it comes to a point where, again, bringing the self-responsibility into it is we weren't taught this stuff automatically, but we can learn these things.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think the only way we learn is really beginning to have that curiosity, and even thinking about things like, you mentioned, clitoris for pleasure early on in our conversation. It's like, I think even part of learning is actually taking a step back and starting with things like, where are my erogenous zones actually at?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting. And the erogenous zones, like they can change in time as far as what areas are like, more stimulated than others. But I think really even like understanding for females, like where on your vulva, where in your labia, where are actually all the parts, where else on your body, your nipples, like where else is really, really or like stimulate pleasure so easily. And so many times I think it's like there's just like this focus on in heterosexual sex. It's like and it's like this focus on, say, the nub, that bulb of the clitoris, and then penetration, right? And that's like
Mm-hmm.
largely what it is. But if we look at like the tissue, right, all of the erogenous spongy tissue below the inner labia, it's like there's so much potential for pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've seen in myself and women I've talked to as well is like sometimes these areas on the labia, on the breasts, on other parts of the vulva are actually more like can bring even more pleasure than sometimes even the clitoris itself. It's like sometimes the clitoris is so compact with nerve endings that either like a little stimulation and people are having orgasms like way too early, way earlier than they want, or it's like can even be like too stimulating and it's even sometimes a little
Mm-hmm.
painful and we can't like access that area very easily without without causing like intensity that doesn't feel good. So I think part of that, part of this conversation too is like take a step back, learn your own body, and this goes for men too. Like, like the area between like the testicles, it's like the penis goes there. The penis goes way up into the pelvis. And so much of the time, like the shaft of the penis, like the part above the testicles is like the only part that's actually explored. But it's like, what does the perineum feel like, right? What does that lower part of the penis feel like? And like really beginning to explore these other areas of the body. And even just doing that, it's like that gives like so much from a novelty perspective, that gives us so much more access to so many different body parts.
Yes, there's so much available to us. And as you said, especially in the heteronormative sex, it tends to be penetration or the little button, the
Right.
little bulb of the clitoris. And there's so much more than that. And taking the time to explore can, as you said, be that novelty and really deepen that connection and learning your bodies together. Because even just rubbing the labia can be so, so pleasurable. And also understanding that each of these erogenous zones change depending on our level of arousal. So what's too intense at the beginning, okay, play with some other areas. And then you can come back to that and all of a sudden it's more aroused. It feels better compared to previously. Like the nipples and the clitoris can just be so, so stimulating at the beginning if you're not fully aroused. And so working from those outside edges inwards and taking the time to explore can be so impactful.
Yeah, as you're talking, it's bringing up for me the idea of tantra, and I love tantra. One of my doctorates is in Chinese medicine, and so like the Taoist side of tantra of really being like in the body and using the breath and using sex for just like changing the energy and the meridians and deeply healing. Sex for healing is like one of my favorite things, in addition to sex for pleasure. But there's so many layers to this. And in Tantra, one of the things that we talk about is the concept of these poles, right? So it's like negative pole and positive pole. And there's this magnetism, right? And we all have negative and positive parts of ourselves. Now, in like classically, a penis is considered the positive pole, and the breasts on a woman are considered a positive pole. And so oftentimes we want to start with warming up the positive poles in this slow way. And so what's interesting about the breast is oftentimes I find that, when talking to couples about breast play, sometimes it can be like, like a little bit like aggressive, and there can be like some hard biting and some grabbing and all these things. And oftentimes, and this is, explore for your own body, but oftentimes what it works the best for women is that like intro with that really slow breast touch. And that's warming up in tantra, like warming up that positive flow, getting that energy going, helping, even sometimes that even like helps like just activate the body and get the genitals wet and all of that. And then later, then some of those like more like kind of aggressive, more like, rough and tumble moves on the breast are oftentimes a lot more welcomed. And of course, that depends person to person. Try it for yourself. But I just bring up that example because when we're talking about these types of different acts, yes, exactly. It's like sometimes something that is amazing at one point in our sexual expression for one night is not like the timing for that could be better over here and not as good over here, right?
Yes. And you're so speaking my language. So much of my practice is rooted in Tantra and Taoism. So like, yes, yes, yes. And
I didn't know we had that in common.
yes. And so another way that we can weave those things in and have some novelty, have some curious play with it is simple things like breath, sound, and movement. It doesn't necessarily need to be the toys. The toys can be fun, but our breath and allowing us to sound can be really fun and pleasurable to work with, and learning to amplify our pleasure or have that energy to move in different ways through something that is seemingly so simple, and using it for edging even as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like what's interesting to me about the layers of say Chinese medicine from a just like more just health perspective versus like from like Taoism and Tantra from that perspective, is when it comes to things like sound, right? So in Chinese medicine from a health perspective, all of our yin organs, so spleen, heart, lungs, they all have different sounds that are associated with them. And the idea is as you use these sounds, the energy goes to these various organs. And there's even methodologies where you can use like they've looked at frequencies, and so using tuning forks at different frequencies to see where does the energy flow if you use these frequencies, and so developing more from a scientific level the frequencies to the organs. So to your point around like using sound, like what I'd like to add on to that is like I think one of the things that happens even with sounds and sex is like it's so easy for people to get stuck on that same like uh that kind of sound. And not saying there's anything wrong with that kind of sound, but there's so many different ways we can actually create sound during sexual experiences. And another layer of exploring and adding to the movement, to the healing, to the sensation in your body, to the orgasm is actually, just exploring, being like, okay, well, if I always make sound like this, being more intentional, being like, well, what if I make sound like this? How does that feel? And what does that change in my body? And, what do I feel sensation in a different way? Does it, delay the orgasm? Does it allow me to stay in that, that heightened 7, 8, 9 on our 1 to 10, scale, with 10 being the orgasm? Sometimes sometimes different sounds will allow us to stay in that really amazing sweet spot longer, where we are not orgasming yet, but we're like on that brink and we want to so bad, and we're trying to make that space last longer so the orgasm could be better. Different sounds can have really great impact. So it's another way too, I think we can create novelty and improvement in our, in our sex practice, is by just being open to like, oh, okay, well, this is the sound that I normally make, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what does it look like if I make, and what does it feel like if I make that sound?
Yes, the sound and the breathing is like its whole realm of exploration in itself.
Yeah.
It really can go in so many different ways, and it's fun to play around with and just notice, okay, how does this affect my body? The sensations, the pleasure, looking at that scale. And I feel like we could go on and on in this, but I do want to make sure that we also touch on what I think is a very alive topic right now that I've been hearing a lot about is around open and closing relationships. When is it right? When is it not right?
Yeah, it's a topic I wind up talking a lot about since I've experienced both types of relationships. I've tried polyamory twice in my life, and I have now committed to, I feel very extremely clear in myself and in my life that I'm monogamous. And I would say that the first relationship that I tried that was poly was a little bit of a mess from a standpoint as like didn't have any training or anything. It was like in my early 20s. I didn't know what I was doing. I should say mid 20s. Anyways, I didn't know like exactly what I was doing, and it was very emotional. Second time around, like it checked off all the boxes from a standpoint of like being respectful and conversations were good, and and like there was not like fights, and we had worked through jealousy and like all the things. But it was really interesting. So the way I like people to think about this is, first, I think with anything we're doing, I think it's really understanding what we're trying to get out of it. Like what is the intention behind why somebody, if you're thinking about opening up, what is the goal? Is it that you're bored? Is it that you want to just expand your connection? Are you, looking for more connection? Is it that you just want more novelty and fun? And the more I think we can start with understanding what is the reason behind why we're doing this, I think that's the initial thing with really beginning to decide, okay, is this interesting for us to explore? Or can that what actually be solved in the context of monogamy just by changing some of these things and, working with people like you and I? And one of the biggest takeaways I would say is, despite, me being monogamous, I think there's pros and cons with both. And I think we have to go into this and say, well, what are the pros and cons of the one versus what are the pros and the cons of the other? Because it's not necessarily like, like it's going to, doing either one of these types of relationship styles are going to have their amazing strengths and their amazing gifts and their amazing challenges. And that was how I made my decision in the end. I was like, well, I like the strengths and the challenges both of monogamy better than the strengths and the challenges of polyamory. And so one of the things that I do think it's really important too in people making this decision is oftentimes when we're thinking about this, it's like the fantasy version. It's having sex with that other person. It's feeling that new, that new relationship energy. It's, maybe having a threesome and it's just like hot and it's full of fantasy. But in the reality, here are the things that people also really need to think through and really play out in their head is like down to, okay, well, what is it going to be like how are we going to deal with when one partner has another lover and the other partner doesn't? What is it going to be like, and how are we going to deal with if one partner wants to bring their lover over to their house? What are our rules on that? What about when our lover comes home, our partner, our say long-term partner, they come home, we know they just had sex with somebody else for the first time. What do we want them to say to us? What are we going to do about if somebody in the poly group comes down with an STI? What are we going to be doing if there's a new partner outside of the poly group? How are we trickling it down to keep everybody safe? What are we doing if one partner is wanting to take a vacation and the other with a lover, the other is not? All of these types of things, right? And same thing in a threesome. Like, if you're doing a threesome, like playing it out, like, what are you going to be doing in your mind if the two partners are kissing and you're left alone? How are you going to deal with that? So the more that we actually play out all of the layers and take the fantasy out, that's a huge thing to say, hey, this is still interesting to me or this is fantasy. Because one of the things I found in poly was like, it is amazing from a standpoint of new experiences, and it's so easy to have that dopamine, and it can be really fun. There was a point when I was poly where it was like multiple people that were like dating each other, and we're all at, the same dinner party, and we're having a ball, and everybody is caring, and everybody is kind. And so I've seen it where there's these moments of just extreme love, right? Which is just like phenomenal. And then I've also seen like the dark side where it's like, okay, well, multiple people are getting jealous and multiple people need to talk about their emotions. And so for me, one of the things that was coming up was I was spending so much time very kindly and very thoughtfully and respectfully having conversations. But I felt like I was having so many conversations around making sure this person's feelings were good and how are we going to deal with this, and there's a new partner, and there was so much time talking about all of the things that went with poly behind the scenes that personally I found it to be exhausting, right? So that's kind of like what I saw as like the shadow. But then there is this other side where it's like, a dinner party of like this openness and this love and this care. And then like, somebody, a partner can't take you to the dentist, but another partner can, and like helping each other. And, there's all of that light side too. So it really, I think the biggest things come down to understanding pros and cons. Like, obviously, a challenge of monogamy is keeping it like passionate, like making it more than just the structure and the habit and all the things in day-to-day life. So I think it's really comes down to like, how do we decide, okay, we like these pros, we like these pros better, or we like these challenges, or we like these challenges better. And then wherever you're going with it, especially if you're trying something new, whether you're poly and deciding you're, going to try monogamy or vice versa, really playing out in your head, like, how is this going to look in this situation, in this situation? And the more you play out the details, I think it's easier then to get out of that like fantasy of just like that, oh, this is going to be so hot. And we really, yes, it can be, but we really want to play out like the details of this is actually what it looks like on a day-to-day basis, and knowing that, is this still interesting or not?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for all of that. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and your thoughts and how the specifics really make a difference, because I am in a monogamous long-term marriage and have no intention of changing that. That's what really works for us. And so I don't pretend to know about the poly world or help people specifically in that. And I feel like there are more and more conversations coming up around it.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of those conversations, not saying it's all of them, because as you said, there are these positives and challenges to every situation, really. But I find it, the more I see it normalized, the more I see it as, oh, we're having this challenge in our relationship. Maybe it's the solution to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm craving novelty. I'm not enough in this way. This can be that solution. And I think the more we can really step back, go big picture, and I love all the specific examples you brought in. I didn't even think of a bunch of those, like the vacation one. Great example.
Yeah.
Or when you know your partner has just had sex with someone else, like how are you going to handle that? And so the more you can get into the specifics, I think that's really, really helpful. So thank you for that. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I'll give you another one that I think is really important. So this happened to a poly couple I knew where they had children. And that brings up another level of like, are we going to tell the kids? Are we not? And like, depending upon the age, that can be a challenging thing. And this couple decided they were not going to tell their children. Well, turns out years down the road, they found out that their kids had actually found out about one of the parents, like other lovers. And for the longest time, we're like carrying this burden of, oh my gosh, my one parent is cheating on my other. And do I tell them? And I feel so bad for them. And so they were carrying this burden of like, do I share this? You know, mom's cheating on dad, this, you know, this kind of scenario. And like, that's an example of like, hey, we like the level and the layers of these things. And, they thought they were really keeping it close. They thought they were doing a great job of that. And they probably were. And kids are very, very smart with what they can figure out.
Yes.
But like, that's just an example of like, we really need, it's like, it is so much more than just going on another, date with another person. It is so much more than that. And that's why I just think it comes back to the what are we really looking to get out of this? And does it make sense for us to go that way? Or does it make sense for us to say, hey, this is the what we're missing? And how do we work with people that can actually teach us how to get the what within the context of our long-term monogamous relationship?
Yes, that for me, I call it desire mapping.
Yeah,
it's a big part of my work is,
Yep.
okay, what is that desire? What are you wanting? How will it make you feel? How will it affect your life? And getting so specific. And then looking at how we can make that happen. What challenges are there? How can we work through that? How can we really set you up for success to get what you want and need and crave? And there's no one solution. Like, we have so many options available to us, almost too many options in a lot of senses. And so there's ways that we can explore, and the more specific we get, I think the more we're able to find our right solution.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think just running out and just seeing the first thing we see online around like, oh, this is the hottest new taboo thing or whatnot is typically not the answer. And the desire mapping, the pleasure mapping, the idea of coming home to truly who you are and truly who your relationship is really, I think, makes the biggest difference in the world. Because when, like, how can we begin to understand like what we actually want if we don't understand our desires? We don't understand things like, in Daniel Laporte's term, our core desired feelings, are these kind of things around like, we want to figure out what our core desired feelings are, where our pleasure centers are, how we communicate those. And it's actually amazing through fantasy, through role play, through all sorts of different, novelty exercises that I teach, how much we can bring those types of sensations of like the excitement and the eroticism and all of that into these longer relationships and, really get to that root of the what without bringing in an outside party.
Absolutely. And I just feel like there's something so special. And this is definitely like my personal opinion and experience, how there's something so special when you are with that one other person through all of this, through those ups and downs, and deepening and having that excitement and the novelty and the play together. Like that connection you get from it is amazing. And as you're talking about your experience and all of the conversations you're having, and again, I'm not necessarily knocking all of these different options. There's something that's right for everyone. But I'm like, that is exhausting. Like, I just want to focus on the conversation, the healing for myself and my one partner.
Yeah, that's what I found. And I have found personally, like another thing I really learned in all my exploration is that for my pleasure body, for my erotic body, I can go so much deeper into the surrender, into that letting go, into the capacity to surrender to the like deeper levels of pleasure when I'm with somebody that I just trust inside and out, when I'm with somebody that just feels like knows me inside and out, that I feel so safe with. And I have found that those feelings of safety, of, deep trust, of deep knowing, like it comes down to, in some ways, like there is a very limited resource of time that, I don't know if anybody has truly found a way to permanently bend it, but I don't really think that's what we get to do in this, on this planet. And, because we have this limited resource, even if we are totally present with everybody we're with and we are fully there with them, the more time we spend with somebody, the more we are able to go deeper, the more we are able to create that layer of depths, of bonds, of all those things. So I think there's a real resource issue around. There's only so much time to go around, and there's only so much time to create that level of immense depth and connection. And for me, I've just noticed, and being with one partner, I've been with my current partner for 4.5 years now, and just noticed that, like, hey, this is, the longer we're together, the deeper we're able to go, the more this builds, the more I feel safe, the more I can let go, the more I can surrender to, the depths of pleasure.
I really think that is the beauty of long-term monogamous relationships, is that depth that you only really get through time with all of the different things that come up. Sure, it can fast track depending on the situations, what you're going through, what the different life experiences are. And regardless, time is going to play a role. You can only fit so much in a certain period of time. You can only go through so much. And so when you get to continue that and continue that year after year, decade after decade, there is so much depth there and so much safety, as you touched on. For me, a key piece of surrender and orgasm is having that foundation of love, safety, and belonging, both within ourselves and with our partner. And it's so key. And so when you can really create that in itself on that deep level, it allows you to go into those depths of pleasure and connection.
Yeah, I've seen that so much in my own life, so much in my work with others as well, around that container, right? That container for, yes, I'm safe. And then I think it gets even more. I think the depth gets even bigger when we're doing the other things that we're talking about in this conversation, which is like the more that we're able to ask for, hey, like, can you try pleasing me this way? And our partner receives it, and our partner provides it. And we realize, wow, I can ask my partner for something, and they receive my request, and they receive my request with love, and they respond to my request. Like those kind of things, I feel like they happen, and they're a practice inside the bedroom, but they also bleed into our non-bedroom, our non-sexual life as well, around like, wow, my partner, like I've asked to, to have this depth of pleasure, and I made this request, and like, wow, my partner showed up for me. And it's like in that state of heightened bliss, like there is a legit neural programming that's happened there. We are programming, it's neuroplasticity. We are programming our nerves, right? Anytime we're in altered states, we know this from studies. Like when we are in altered states, there's so much of a heightened ability to retrain our nervous system. So it's amazing what can happen when it's like, oh, maybe somebody that doesn't have like an easy enough time, like a very easy time, say, asking for something in their life with their partner or otherwise, but they practice it in the bedroom in this heightened state, and their lover like shows up and they receive and they respond and they care. Well, that is like teaching the neurological system, like this is how like I can ask for what I want. I have confidence to do this. We even see in research sex improves confidence. And I think this is part of it. I think the deeper we go into, hey, asking for what I want, having somebody receive that, even if they can't give me that, receive it with love and say, hey, maybe not this, but what about this? Will that work? Right? There's so much that I think actually happens from like a complete reprogramming of the nervous system component.
Yes, it really does change everything.
Yeah.
Like for me, this work, it's not just about the bedroom and pleasure and orgasms, although that's an amazing part of it, absolutely. But it's the ripple effect.
Yeah.
Like your life and your relationship with yourself, confidence, everything changes.
Yeah.
You're changing your full body, your neural state, your nervous system state, all of it. And it's all towards more pleasure, more connection, more confidence, more joy, more presence.
Hence why I say pleasure is not just about desire, but something we require because of all of that.
Yes. Yes, I love that saying. That's a great one.
Anything that's like pithy like that, right? It's easy for us to remember.
Absolutely. Okay. I feel like, again, we could go on and on. I could talk to you for hours.
For sure.
But I would love to wrap it up now. We are coming up to time. So I'm curious if you just have any last messages for those thinking about someone in a long-term relationship, wanting to rekindle that passion. Perhaps they're in the middle of it. Perhaps they're in the beginning stages of it. What message do you have for her?
Well, it doesn't matter where you're at, beginning stage, end stage, middle stage, none of that matters. What matters is if you intuitively in your heart feel like you are wanting a different flavor of the relationship, depth. And if you are feeling drawn to get that, then you're worth it. Then it is worth it. Your relationship is worth it. That we see so much, with this whole pleasure is not just about desire, but something we require. We see so much in literature around what happens with pleasure, around what happens to our nervous system, our sleep, even building bones through the hormones that are released with pleasure. Like it's on and on and on and on. So I think one of the biggest things is we get so lost in the overwhelm. It's so easy in today's society that high performing person and so much going on and tasking and tasking and tasking. And I get it because that's my world too. And the more we can take a step back and say, hey, this is truly self-care. This is truly relationship care. That if we are prioritizing, if we're looking at the things that we most value in life, probably our relationships, ourselves, these sort of things. And we build out a pie chart of where we're spending our time and literally do this exercise and look to see if your pie chart around your time matches your values of what's most important. And if it doesn't, it's probably time to make a change. And one of the biggest things is adding in that time for pleasure with you, with your partner to really support that relationship. It's worth it. You're worth it. Your relationship is worth it.
Yes, we are so worth it. And I love that pie chart example and the specificity of it in really looking at your time with it. I've done kind of a pie chart in terms of desires and goals, and okay, let's put our attention there. But I think that's a really beautiful piece to actually look at your time. Where are you spending the majority of your time, and how does that match up?
Exactly.
So thank you for that. And yeah, it really is about just following those curiosities, those nudges, those desires. They're there for a reason. They're a part of us. You're worth it. So thank you so much for joining us. Where can listeners go to find you, perhaps to get that yes, no, maybe checklist? I know you have a podcast. Please share all the things.
Yeah, so definitely go to mysexdoc.com to get my yes, no, maybe checklist. Another giveaway is that you guys can get for free is I have an ebook for free. So if you go to hotterlife.com, then you can download my ebook for free, which is 5 easy steps for mind-blowing orgasms and romance.
Mm-hmm.
So super easy to remember, mysexdoc.com and hotterlife.com. And then you can find my podcast, Libido Lounge, as well as on all podcast platforms. We will be interviewing Janine really soon on it. So you'll hear her on my podcast too. And yeah, those are the easiest ways to get started and to just get some freebies is to go to those 2 sites.
Wonderful. Thank you. We will make sure we have all of those linked in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Diane.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
And thank you for all of those listening. We so appreciate you being along for the ride. Again, I will have absolutely all of those links there for you. So it's really easy for you to check out those different resources and experience some more mind-blowing orgasms. If you found this episode helpful or interesting, I would so appreciate it if you could leave a rating or a review. It really makes an impact to have this podcast reach more women out there who can use this information, these resources. So thank you again so much. Sending you off with so much love. Thank you for joining us inside the Unapologetic with Janine McKinnon podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you feel called, I would so appreciate it if you left us a review to help us reach more women and couples so they can experience deeper connection and more expansive pleasure inside and outside the bedroom too. Until next time, embrace your desire and experience your magic.